Take a trip back to 1975 with us. A gallon of gas was 44 cents, a gallon of milk was $1.57, and a new house was only $39,000. But more importantly, Bruce Springsteen would unleash his priceless album, Born to Run, on us. We'll be right back. Welcome, friends, to the 3324 podcast. Thank you so very much for joining us. We appreciate it. You don't know how much it warms our heart, Eric. Is that true? Is your heart warm right now?
It very much is.
Okay, it's not a heart attack.
Not just because it's humid in my house right now.
And it's not a heart attack, is it?
No, it's not.
Okay, good. Our hearts are warmed by the love that we feel and the gratitude and appreciation. That's the kind of warmth.
That's right.
Kind of like the ET, right? The heart light. Turn on your heart light.
Yeah.
Like what, you know.
Isn't there a song?
There's Neil a song, Diamond, right? Turn on your heart light.
That's right. Neil Diamond. There you go.
He was, I don't know how he got on the ET soundtrack or... Neil Diamond, Spielberg, and E.T. and Reese's Pieces. Go figure. But we're just as warmed by it by you spending time, choosing to spend time with us. There are tons of podcasts out there, millions probably, and we're one of those million. And we appreciate you stopping by and just hanging with us. So continue to do so and spread the word. If you enjoy the conversation that we're having here, or if you really hate it and say, "Oh my God, these guys are horrible," you have to. If you want to hate listen, that's okay too. Yeah. I certainly hate watch shows. There's such a thing as hate watching things. So
that's right.
Hopefully
let us
that's
know.
Not the case. Hopefully
give us that feedback. Either way, we would really appreciate that.
Hopefully you're like listening and not hate listening. Either way, welcome aboard. You found us where we feel is the best place for music and movie podcasting. Join us on social media, won't you? At 3324 Podcast on Facebook and Instagram. And we'll leave it at that. Just go there and we won't tell you the untold riches and treasures that await you there. You
always a mouthful. Always a mouthful. I don't know how you do it. Always getting it out there.
It rolls off. There's nothing written. There it is. The open is written and nothing else is written and nothing else is planned. It just.
Well, there you go.
Gift of gab.
Right. Yeah.
Is that what it's called?
Gift of gab. Well, maybe.
Chewing the fat, as my parents.
So you're saying that's the only part of this is that it's scripted. Is okay.
Yeah, I write the open, and then after that, it's just kind of wherever we go. Whatever just crap spills out of my mouth, we go with, and we're going to continue that for many episodes to come.
That's right.
That's our commitment to you of more unfettered and unfiltered and unwritten, unscripted podcasting for you. So, but we do have some stuff that we want to talk about that we will get to, and this album is just a really special one.
Yeah,
Bruce Springsteen's Born to Run album came out in 1975. Let's do the stats so this way we can get right into the discussion. It was released in August of 1975. All songs were written by the boss.
The boss.
If you don't know who the boss is, it's not your employer. It's not the person that signs your paychecks. Bruce Springsteen is the boss.
Yeah.
We're talking about rock music. There's only one. There's the king of rock and roll, the king of pop. All this other stuff, there's only one boss. Yeah. And it is this man, Bruce Springsteen. He wrote all the songs and he writes all of the songs. Produced by Bruce Springsteen, Mike Appel, and John Landau. Mm-hmm. There were 2 singles released from this album. Born to Run, which hit number 23, and 10th Avenue Freeze Out, which hit number 83. What? How dare the listening audience of 1975 treat these 2 songs this way?
Well,
we'll talk about FM radio and the savior of Bruce Springsteen, especially in the New York area.
Sure.
I think we talked about it in our Billy Joel episode, how since we're in the New York area, those New York artists seem to have gotten more
how similar they are.
Just like in Detroit, I'm sure Chicago Sticks, in Chicago Sticks and in Detroit, you get like Bob Seger, the hometown heroes probably get more play in those regions. Those people are more familiar with them. So that's what Springsteen is to us.
If Billy Joel was the sort of ambassador of New York, so to speak, Bruce Springsteen is definitely New Jersey.
He's the mayor of New Jersey.
Across the pond there. Yeah.
And his security detail is Bon Jovi. This hit number 18 on the Billboard charts. Only 18. Again, weird. But 7 times platinum despite all that. This album had some legs. What's called in the industry. It's got some legs.
Yeah.
And then Bruce Springsteen was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 1999, which is very apropos. He certainly deserves to be in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. So,
no doubt.
What's your connection, if any, to Springsteen?
Wow. I when I listened to this record, I there was a sense of sadness that I felt because I wish that I had been that person back then to have listened to this album and realized how special it was and how free spirited it was, and the image of just getting out there and enjoying your life, and being such a introverted kid growing up, I didn't appreciate that kind of thing back in the day. And of course, I didn't get into Springsteen until Born in the USA. So that was the the advent of MTV. You're seeing all the videos, and of course that album was a monster in itself. There's
he blasted into the stratosphere with that album.
Of course, yeah.
I don't know if it was by design or not. A lot of people, will use Born in the USA as like the dividing point, or he kind of sold out. I don't know when you're making an album like that necessarily what's going to happen. I don't know unless that was his stated, unless he was going for really poppy stuff, which that album decidedly is.
Yeah, we kind of touched upon this in another episode, and it's like, it's one of those things. It's like, because it's so popular, because, there's so many hits off of it, what does selling out mean? I mean, that album was, to me, is just as important.
I think the Springsteen fans.
Poignant as Born to Run, but perhaps not as erratic, perhaps not as like, grungy kind of, feel to
definitely
it.
Definitely more polished.
Much more polished. Yeah, absolutely. But
product of the 80s.
But definitely in total command and total control of the songwriting, and the band too evolved with him. They would even admit that in the recording of Born to Run, they first started out as a band that the first two albums was essentially them like recording them as they played live, very sort of loosey, like very erratic. And, but here Born to Run was the first album where the songs became much more structured, and they had to have that discipline. And so the band learned this as, along with Bruce, to do this. And so over time, you get to Born in the USA. And so, by that point, the band is where they need to be.
Yeah. So, they're all seasoned pros. The lineup was pretty much set.
Right.
I came to Bruce Springsteen relatively early, again, vis-a-vis, one of my siblings, my sister. Yeah. We talked about it in the Steve Miller episode that, she had Steve Miller Band Book of Dreams. So I kind of got into that. And then I had mentioned that she then went off on like a Bruce Springsteen tear. And I didn't know anything of this guy. It's kind of I didn't know. And she's listening to these songs, Candy's Room, and all this, Darkness on the Edge of Town, I think was the big album for her. But she's, just absorbing all of it. I was listening to what she was playing, but I wasn't getting it. I was kind of like, okay. Yeah. I was listening to Book of Dreams instead, which is the album I kind of grabbed from her. But then she was kind of elevating and herself evolving her taste into what the next level would be. And she was like a big Springsteen fan. And that's one of those and I think that's where the Born in the USA divide comes, is these people that liked that old sound, what you call the classic Springsteen sound. When you get to Born in the USA, it's decidedly different. It is a different feel, and maybe, like you said, it's polished, it's slicker. It doesn't have that rough and tumble feel that like kind of heartland American rock sound that Springsteen cultivated, that others like Seeger would be called, put in the same kind of pile as Springsteen, that heartland rock, American rock, Petty and the Heartbreakers. Yeah. All those groups kind of make up like that American rock of the 70s sound. So she was ahead of the curve there. And like you said, just, I think when Hungry Heart came out from the River, I think that kind of brought him a little bit more into the forefront, and kind of people Bruce Springsteen. Oh, okay. And then in the 80s, he did We Are the World. So he was hot on the heels of Born in the USA. Yeah. Then did We Are the World, which kind of elevated, everybody on that record into the stratosphere. So, it's just, he's a national treasure. If nothing else in American, it's funny when I think about Dylan. I mean, when I think about Springsteen, when new artists come on the scene, right, in the 70s, they were either the new Beatles or the new Dylan. Like that was always the thing. Like someone would come out, if you were a singer-songwriter, you were like the new Dylan. And if you came out with smart pop stuff like the group Raspberries or the Knack, You were the next Beatles.
Yeah.
You were one or the other. Like they were very easy to like categorize people. And Springsteen was put into the box of like Dylan, the introspection, that storytelling, songwriting that Springsteen is so closely mirrored with Dylan, and this album has a lot of some Dylan influence in it, but it's just always interesting. It was like you were either the new Beatles or you were the new Dylan. Like I remember when Sultans of Swing came out from Dire Straits, and Dire Straits was not big. They were comparing him to Dylan because he kind of like had that kind of storytelling vibe to it. And, it's kind of like, I don't know if you want to be kind of put that baggage on you.
Well,
you're the new this, you're the new that. It's like, no, you're just who you are.
Right. I think in the case of Bruce, this album, I think what Dylan, more or less, he went from being one thing to another, and there was so many changes that he had already made in those early years. Bruce came on the scene, and it's like he was hungry. You could definitely tell. This was like he's like the Rocky of rock, rock and roll. Because if you think about it, like seriously, like the early stuff is like he's really hungry and he's got a lot to say, and he's singing for a certain demographic of people, and he's really trying to get that out there. And every song feels like that, like a story, like a movie, like an epic. And he's really striving already. Like Dylan might not have been that way. Like he's just a songwriter, and he just happened to be a great lyricist back in the day. Maybe he was the voice of the people at the time. Maybe he wasn't. He might have thought that way, but then of course other people started following, and then of course when people started following Dylan, he just turns on a dime and says, "No, I don't care about that stuff." That's Dylan. Yeah. But I think in this case, Bruce was really trying to be a voice for I think Americana, like for the blue collar worker, for whatever it was, or the youth of the time, like that were just screaming to get out and to get out there and live life. And of course, the song "Born to Run" is the anthem for that. So but Springsteen, his career wasn't without. It was actually mostly downs until this album. He had put out 2 albums in 1 year. In 1973, he put out Greetings from Asbury Park, New Jersey, and then the follow-up, which was Wild, the Innocent, and E Street Shuffle. Not well received. Actually, the Greetings from Asbury Park was actually rejected by the label. And said, we need something that's more listenable. So he wrote a little song called Blinded by the Light. Which this even, and it goes to show that his version, which we talked about in the covers better than the original episode, which you chose as the Manfred Mann version, is the superior version. And even him performing it on his own album, it was kind of lackluster. If you listen to it, it's like, it's not the greatest rendition of his own song. So he decidedly had some issues with the first 2 albums of, he was kind of more of a folky, like he was living 2 lives. He was doing solo kind of acoustic guitar stuff, which was kind of folky. And then he was doing his band stuff, which had a different sound, and the label was preferring the band stuff, like the more fully produced and realized stuff. And there were compromises made. He's like, well, I like the kind of the guitar, the solo-y stuff. So they had to make compromises on those first 2 albums of, okay, we'll do 5 songs with like the band style stuff, and then do other 3 or 4 songs of your style. So it wasn't easy going for him, and that's what led to. When we catch up with him in 74 and 75, the label says, listen, and we've had this conversation before too on other episodes. The label's like, listen, we're going to give you more money for this to make this album, but you need to come up with something. Like, we need something better than what you've been doing. And that's a weird thing to say to Bruce Springsteen in retrospect, but at the time it was a fledgling artist. He was only 2 albums in. Both albums came out in the same year, so a very similar vibe, except for Rosalita, which on the Wild, Innocent, and E Street Shuffle. I mean, that was like kind of the calling card for what was to come. I think like that song is just a straight up rave up, right? Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, sure. I mean, and of course, Born to Run took 6 months to just record the one song. And that was like to me, it was like he was really going for that big on layered stack, like he was very inspired by Phil Spector and the Wall of Sound thing. And, I cannot believe, because I had, in prep for this, there's a documentary on Amazon Prime. It's about the making of the album. And I had no idea that there was so much on this one song. There was so many layers of strings and horns and vocals and all these guitars and
glockenspiel.
The glockenspiel, which I have to be honest, that thing, like, that's the one thing that always annoyed me about the early Springsteen was that glockenspiel. I never understood why.
I like that ding.
What is that jingly thing that's going on?
It's like, it's almost like bell. It's almost like bicycle bells.
Yeah,
in different notes. So
it's like I never understood, like, what is that? Like, and he would use it all the time, like even on Hungry Heart, and but
using the studio.
It became a staple. It became part of the sound. But yeah, and I guess that when they started getting into the album, it was a very problematic production.
Yeah, wasn't easy until they kind of finished Born to Run. And it's funny you mentioned Phil Spector, because we talked about in our In Excess episode, In Excess is stated like their mission statement for Kick, right? Was we want every song to be that it could be a single. Bruce Springsteen's mission statement for Born to Run was he wanted to make an album that sounded like Roy Orbison singing Bob Dylan, produced by Phil Spector.
Yeah, that's right.
That was his stated goal. And if you listen to it, it's all there. Right, that wall of sound of recording all the instruments at the same time, so they would bleed into each other in the recording mix. His soaring vocals on like Born to Run and 10th Avenue Freeze Out echoes Roy Orbison. He mentions a Roy Orbison song in the first, in the very first track. He name checks a Roy Orbison song. So those influences are if you're listening to it, it's absolutely there. The wall of sound is on certain songs. Is full on. It's a fuller sound than the previous two albums. You can hear it, and the production sounds a little bit different as a result. It is that thicker, kind of heavier sound of just a full on. And you hear like stuff like the glockenspiel, like he's putting in all those little extra things that normally a songwriter wouldn't do. Right, when you're just writing a song, a man with his guitar, it's good enough. But now you're thinking on a different level of, like you said, building a song, and what's going to enhance it, and those little dings and all those little things in Born to Run add to the majesty and just the epicness of the song. So it's all right there. Roy Orbison singing Bob Dylan, produced by Phil Spector. That is Born to Run.
Literally, right? Like, it's a great, phenomenal way to describe it, because once you know what you're going, once you know what to listen for.
It's there.
It is there, and you will find it. You will find it, and that's the interesting thing about going back and listening to some of these albums, when you realize what it took to really put it together. There's a really great story about Stevie Van Zandt coming into the production on Born to Run, and he wanted he instantly heard one particular Bruce played him a guitar lick, which sounded very much like a Roy Orbison lick, like he's, but it had like a warped, right on the end of it. It was like, it went up, like it was like a warped, like, and it had like that vibrato on the end. And Stevie Van Zandt loved that. And he's like, man, that's great. And then when they played back, like they started working on the song, and, he was supposed to play, part of, the same thing, like the same riff. He went to play it, and he played it as you hear it. You don't hear that upper thing at the end. Like, he played it like straight, and that's the way Stevie Van Zandt heard it. And Bruce is like, "What are you doing? You're supposed to be playing that riff." He's like, "I don't hear that riff though, man." It's like, that's because that's what the song, that's what you hear in the song. And then sure enough, Bruce went back to listen. He goes, "I can't hear the riff. I can't hear that riff that I originally gave you." Because it was so layered and so many things, there was so many parts already to it, and it wasn't even completed yet. It was only half completed. So
pretty amazing. And this was Stevie Ray, Steven Van Zandt's first album. Everyone thinks as him as like a long-term member from the beginning. He wasn't. This was his first album, because he was busy being a founding member of Southside Johnny and the Asbury Jukes, writing songs for there, and on his own career path. He knew Springsteen from childhood, like in the 60s, crossing paths. And then in the 70s, those things started, his fortune starting to turn a little bit, connects with Springsteen and just kind of comes into the mix. I think he did the horn arrangements for 10th Avenue Freeze Out as well.
Yeah.
So Steven Van Zandt coming in kind of also gives him a little bit, certainly not an equal partner, but someone else who's kind of on the same level or that Springsteen can kind of trust to work with and help shape the sound.
Yeah, I kind of think we thought of it as like he was just a sounding board, like coming into the sessions, just hanging out, like just as friends, like like what do you think of this? What do you bouncing ideas off each other, that kind of thing, and he actually became a part of the process. And like you mentioned about the horn on 10th Avenue, it's like they had all this like arrangements and all this paper, and he came in, he's like, get rid of the paper, man. I know exactly what needs to be done, and he just did it. Like he just like and everybody understood it, and then that's what they did, and that's amazing. I can only think of one other person that actually did that, and that's Phil Collins. We talked about that at Face Value. He comes in and knows the arrangements and what he wants to and what the horn should sound like. And that's exactly the arrangement that was put down.
Just execute. Now, and that was one of the things that Springsteen was looking for on this album. And if you listen to it, you can hear it.
Yeah.
Is that he wanted instrumental introductions on all the songs to kind of set tone and not just kind of, and if you listen, all the songs have like either some type of a piano instrument, something starting off the song and kind of pushing the boat out into the water, as it were, and then the song starts
and it builds up. Yeah,
and it kind of sets the tone. An epic song like Jungle Land, and
oh man,
or just when you hear the horns on 10th Avenue Freeze Out, like it's something like, and that became like the Springsteen sound, like the tinkling piano, and when Springsteen's like when the big man joined the band, and then Clarence Clemens, like unmistakable sax comes in, it's like, like you get tingles listening sax. To it. Yeah. Because he's got a sound like no one else does. And the way the interplay of the band was, and then Springsteen's vocal on 10th Avenue Freeze Out is just, you get a little bit of the Orbison soaring vocal in there when he's singing I'm on my own. It's kind of, you hear him going for it.
I know like what really that kind means. Of putting it out there. I understand that language because I understand like the tone. Like people listen for like there are different tones of trying to get a certain tone for a guitar. Yeah, as a frustrated singer, like I'm not much of anything, but it's like I understand where that's coming from, like the balance of pitching that type of a vocal.
Mm-hmm.
And reaching those heights, and but the clarity of that,
and
making your voice kind of like it kind of goes in a circle, right? It reaches it. It's hard to describe, but it's like almost like a horseshoe, kind of like an effect in your ears, and the vocal just sort of wraps around and comes back, and and Bruce has that kind of vocal.
And he was able to stay within his range and not try and sound like Roy Orbison, but to channel the spirit. And again, you take the inspirations, you take Spector, you take, Orbison and Dylan, and you get Born to Run. And that's, again, we've said that in the past, is influences are then filtered through somebody and you get something totally different, And
it's also interesting to note that the entire album was composed on piano.
Yeah.
Bruce, would compose the songs on piano. And then of course he brings in Roy Bittan, who is, his contribution to the E Street Band is just, a huge factor. I mean, that piano and his piano playing is I would argue that he's better than Ben Montench, like the Heartbreakers. That's that, and the only reason why I make that comparison, it's because of Stevie Nicks. Okay. I went to see her in 83 in the Wild Heart Tour, and she had both of them.
Oh, really? She had Roy Bittan as well?
She and Ben Montench both in the band. Which was amazing. It was like these powerhouse, these keyboards. I'm like, holy shit. I'm like, and I was like trying to like listen for both because they're both such prominent figures in the sound, the overall sound of those bands. And I think, but I think Roy Bittan really, he has that soulful, I mean, he just flows, man. He can go across those keys, and he's just such a great keyboardist.
And then there's two other keyboardists as well that would feature prominently, David Sanchez and Danny Federici also, which were members of the E Street Band. And it's funny because A lot of people think because of 10th Avenue Freeze Out and the name E Street Band that the corner of 10th Avenue and E Street is where the name came from, but it actually doesn't. Yeah. It was actually David Sanchez's mother's house was on E Street, and that's where everybody used to rehearse when they were first coming up. So it became, that's where they got the name from. And oddly enough, and I never noticed it, because you see Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers, right? So when you look at an album, it says Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers. E Street Band does not appear on any of these albums on the cover as the title. Yeah. Every album is credited to Bruce Springsteen, but the E Street Band is so ingrained into the consciousness that it's almost like the Mandela effect, that you think you see Bruce Springsteen and the E Street Band on these album covers, but it just says Bruce Springsteen.
You're
none of them are credited to the E Street Band.
You're
but
absolutely
you think
right.
in your mind it's there.
Yeah.
It's like that weird thing, it's a strange thing. And oddly enough, we said Springsteen was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 1999. The E Street Band actually got their due. They were inducted separately in 2014.
Yeah.
So for a band that does not appear on any credited, the members are credited on the albums, but as the E Street Band does not appear on any of these records, for them to get their due is something pretty special too. That should tell you the impact that they had on music. That it's not just Bruce Springsteen.
Absolutely,
it's those guys also. Of the same mind, and just like killing it, like saxophone and keyboards and two guitar, bass, bass playing, and just all the great stuff you've got on this album. He's got a band behind him that is just ready. They came ready to rock. I mean, that was the thing on this album.
That's right. And I think maybe, really, I don't know, maybe he reserved the name for the live setting. Perhaps maybe when they're going out on tour, it's like, that was more equated to, what you're getting, Bruce Springsteen and the E Street Band, what you're going to get.
I think they were just probably his band. Just like, think about Billy Joel, right? He used like the same guys,
but he never had a name.
Yeah.
They didn't have their own identity as a band.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I guess they became known as, hey, this is the E Street Band that supports me, but not in the beginning, maybe not formally.
Yeah,
as a formal thing, but then they kind of, this is the E Street Band with, so it wasn't like, we're Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers. It was kind of like, I'm Bruce Springsteen.
Yeah.
And then these guys, I'm using the same guys, and then they became the E Street Band.
Well, I got to tell you, it's very noticeable on those albums that he did in the late 80s, like Tunnel of Love. He kind of went off on his own and did his own thing. And then of course the two albums that he released at the same time, much like the Guns N' Roses Use Your Illusion, like Volume 1 and 2. When he released, Human Touch and Lucky Town, and two very distinctive sounding albums. One was a full-on band, and I never understood. But he does not use the full E Street Band on either of those albums, which is odd, because one album is full-on a full band sound. Yeah, and the other is more stripped back and more acoustic.
They took a break for a little while.
Yeah, and it's very noticeable. You can definitely tell the difference. So if there's no doubt, if there's any doubt in anybody's mind how much of an impact that this band has in the sound, you check out those albums that I mentioned, and you would definitely tell the difference between what he did. Even on Born in the USA, it's the E Street Band, and it.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, and getting back to Born to Run, besides the influences that Springsteen stated, were what he was working off of, he also took what's called a four corners approach to the recording of the album, which I'd never heard of before, but it makes sense, because a lot of times in our episodes we talk about track listings and how songs are arranged and what that means. Yeah. And with Springsteen's approach with this four corners approach is he wanted the opening tracks on each side to be more uplifting and positive, and the closing track on each side to kind of be a little bit more of a downer and kind of come, a little bit kind of bringing back to reality. So if you look at the opener on side one is Thunder Road, which is kind of a little more of an up-tempo song, kind of a little more hopeful, and Born to Run opens side two, right? So those are kind of big, big songs and kind of, a little more exciting. And then closing side one is Backstreets. And then closing side two is Jungle Land, which are both just kind of, the openers deal with hope. and then the closers are a little bit more of despair, and there's that contrast. And he was thinking about that. How do I want this album to play out? And what was he trying to accomplish and take the listener on? And you have to appreciate that, that there was a stated thing of this, each side is going to be equal in how we open it and how we close it. And we're not just kind of, fudging the songs around for time and what fits best. It's kind of like, here's what we're trying to present.
Yeah. Yeah. It's almost like in a way, we talk about concept albums all the time, right? There is, but the fact that every song is a concept in itself. It's so, they are little stories and just, it takes you on a journey of it's very cinematic. I've heard his music referred to a lot in that way. Everybody kind of meant cinematic. Yeah. Like movie, even members of the band say it. So it's, but it's true. Every song is, you feel the characters in the song. He actually writes characters, and Billy Joel would do that as well, but perhaps not as prolifically as Springsteen did. I think, with his music, it's always, it's either about himself or it's about someone, someone else.
Closer to I would say closer to poetry than Billy Joel.
I totally,
right? Because like you said, they're encapsulated stories. With Born to Run, there was a conscious move away from like kind of specifically targeting Jersey, because he became known for that. So he tried to kind of move away from being specifically that and kind of broaden the scope of the stories a little bit and a little less kind of hometowny, but the effect is still the same. Born to Run is a lot of the songs equate cars with people and emotions and kind of getting away. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of those parallels drawn with vehicles and what it means to kind of get in one and the notion of getting away from it all. And it's that simple, but you need to be strong enough to take the chance, right? You need to kind of be, will you come, Wendy, come with me and we'll go together and we'll be able to make something of it. We'll be able to make it if we do it together, but by myself, I can't. Right. And there's that, and that's where that hopefulness comes in, right? It's like, we can do this together, you and I, we're one on this. And then you get kind of the, like the songs like Backstreets, which are just a little more kind of bringing it back down to reality, the nature of relationships. Which kind of really, you sit here, you got to,
life doesn't exactly, beat you like it, sometimes things don't work out. And, so that's reflected as well. And of course, in later years too, like when he was dating, Julianne Phillips, right. I think she was a model.
Yeah, she was a model.
Yeah, she was a model. And that, of course, Tunnel of Love is pretty much that entire album.
The breakup album.
The breakup album. And I actually like that album a lot, to be honest. But there's some really one step up is a phenomenal song. I love that song. But he knows how to give you everything, and for someone that's so young, we often talk about, like, how do these people who haven't really experienced half the stuff they're talking about in these songs yet, how do they have the wisdom to write such beautiful lyrics and really get it right? That, years later, you're listening to these songs and you could relate to them even more now than ever than when you first heard them back in the day.
Yeah, was he 20? It was like 25, 24. 26 when he started writing this. 1974. So it's 23, 24. Album comes out 25, 26. I think you've mentioned in the past, I think you have to be an old soul, right? You have to be able to connect to, you have to have a deeper understanding of some of those universal things that some people like me are just a walk through life oblivious to. Like you don't really sit down and think about it, right? You kind of, you experience life, but you don't necessarily sit and think about every aspect of it. But him sitting down at the piano and either these are drawn from experience or they're things that he imagines the way life is, or the way he would like a relationship to be, or the way that relationships end or hard times come on people, much in the way of Dylan as basically a child of 22, I guess, when he first, or 20, 22, when he started with these folk songs and these protest songs. It's like, how do you have that that deeper connection and that deeper understanding. And Springsteen had it in spades. I mean, he's just been able to sustain it throughout his career,
But it wasn't easy for him to get it out there, though, too. I think he had a very hard time, I think, trying to convey what he was trying to say and get it right, because in his mind, he was already thinking big. He was thinking, well, I want the music to also reflect the sadness or the exuberation of what I'm singing about, what I'm writing. The music needs to reflect that as well. So he had both things in mind, which, that's God. I mean, that's a gift that I can't imagine, ever having. It's only, you can only dream of even thinking of something so substantial and so
and using the same tools, right? Using the same toolkit, so you get Clarence Clemens with like a buoyant saxophone solo on some of these songs on 10th Avenue Freeze Out and the up-tempo songs, but then that same saxophone can become depressing and sad and heart-wrenching when used in a different context.
That's right.
So he's using he's got the set amount of tools. So it's not like he's bringing in different things for different songs to convey something. He's using the band with what they have to coax out from the band members the different feelings that supplement his lyrics, which is an amazing thing. Again, I think everyone needs to, if you're going to check this album out, you got to grab the lyrics. It's as important. He's not always the easiest to understand, just because of it. He's a little, sometimes could be mumbly, but on the palace, you're like, you don't. You're trying to. It can get a little bit like that. So if you can grab the lyrics, you're really going to get, and Dylan is the same way. I mean, he follows in Dylan's footsteps. Same, you can't understand. Michael Stipe, same thing. Can't understand these guys, but what they're saying is important. And I think with this album, you kind of want to read those stories, and have like the music accompaniment. And I think that's half the fun, is kind of having the music accompany it and read because that's what these are. Like you said, these are just little self-contained
that's the
nuggets.
Thing. It's like you do some of the work. Like, it's not just a simple matter of just sitting there, because if you're going to just casually listen to that, you're not going to enjoy it. It's impossible to sit down. It'll pass you by. It'll pass you right, but you're not going to understand the nuances of what somebody like Dylan or Bruce Springsteen are trying to do. And it's more than just a simple pop song that you hear on the radio. Like, that's a great, catchy little tune. If you're kind of listening half-assed to this stuff, you're not gonna get it. So you're right. So sitting there really engaging and reading the lyrics as you're listening, that was always something that I always liked to do anyway. As a kid, had the advent of having a record player and listening to this stuff and reading what was, sometimes the lyrics didn't make any sense, but who cares? I mean, it's like, but that's part of it. Like, you're just like, wow, it's like, but once you're engaged like that and in the full on experience, then you understand what he's trying to do. And I think that was his intent, from the get-go, is to really, to get people, much like watching a film as well. Like, you're totally engaged in it, and you really have to immerse yourself, especially if it's a film that it's not going to grab you like right away. Like, it's not some crazy comedy or whatever. It's something that you really need to pay attention to and get engaged with. And so, so a lot of his music reflects that.
It's easy to hear those hits on FM radio. And we kind of didn't even get to that yet. Like I said, like this album, number 18 on Billboard, in 1975, he was, this was his third album, right?
Yeah.
Top 10 best-selling albums in 1975. We'll do in reverse order, 10 to 1. Okay. And again, I love doing this now just to see,
of course,
just to really position like
the comparison.
Again, this was his third album, and his first two weren't all that, like, there was not a lot of support for and confidence from the record company. So number 10, Eagles, One of These Nights. And I think that was their third album as well. Right. But they're fortunate. Out of the gate, though, the Eagles were hitting it right from the beginning.
Yeah.
Number 9, Paul Simon, Still Crazy After All These Years.
Okay.
Number 8, Wings, Venus and Mars. Number 7, Fleetwood Mac, what would be called the Fleetwood Mac White Album. So that's the emergence of Lindsey Buckingham and Stevie Nicks. Number 6, Elton John, Captain Fantastic and the Brown Dirt Cowboy. Queen, Night at the Opera. Led Zeppelin, Physical Graffiti. That was the number 4 top selling album. Number 3, Bob Dylan, Blood on the Tracks.
Which is,
Number 2, Bruce Springsteen, Born to Run.
Okay.
And then the number 1 was Pink Floyd, Wish You Were Here. In
Wow.
1975. So he's besting Zeppelin, which by Physical Graffiti, they were already Led Zeppelin. Like, they were the monsters of rock at that point. Dylan, Blood on the Tracks, that was like his resurgence. Blood on the Tracks, that was like Dylan coming back
great
again.
Ones. Yeah,
Queen, Night at the Opera. I mean, he's again this somewhat obscure guy from Jersey who put out 2 albums in 1 year, the 2 years previous, that really didn't do anything. Was able just to kind of set his mind to doing what, making a statement, and he had the game plan of what he wanted it to sound like.
Yeah.
And then being able to execute it. And second biggest selling album of the year with no discernible radio hits either. Right. So, I think we could probably look at the top, Elton John, probably, there was some probably radio hits there. Queen, obviously, Fleetwood Mac, Paul Simon, Eagles. Those are all radio friendly artists that you were here. One of These Nights, that was a gigantic song. That was probably number 1 for them at the time.
Right.
But this album that comes out hits number 18. Its second single hits 83, was the second biggest selling album of 1975. So, kudos.
Perhaps it was, the advent, most of the artists you mentioned were, or, like you say, they were pretty much already established. Maybe Bruce was the fresh face, on the scene, and I think he really struck a nerve with especially people from New Jersey and
from this area,
the East Coast, and that was the sound of
we couldn't get away from it,
our territory.
We couldn't get away. Like Rosalita was just like.
Yeah,
this weird song, ho 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 ho. Yeah. Like it was just like this, like I would always hear that on like classic rock radio, and I didn't know what it was. I just knew the song, but I didn't know who it was or what it was. And then Born to Run comes out, and you start hearing these big epic sounding songs from this guy. And meanwhile, he's just a guy, and with a Telecaster, one of the few rock artists that play a Telecaster as well. That's been his weapon of choice since the jump. You don't see him playing a Strat or anything else.
Dirty. I love the sound of it.
Yeah.
When he some of the solos that he puts out, and just the little accents. It's just a great sound.
Because it's twangy, like Roy Orbison. Like that was the thing.
Yeah.
Telecasters are usually used by country artists because they've got a little more of the twang, a little more of the dirt. The Strats are a little bit more clean sounding, a little more fluid.
Strats. I like to think that I guess you could say that Telecasters are the poor man's Stratocaster, because the Strat is more. The dull. There's more like.
It's the dirty T-shirt, and the Strat is like the tux.
Yeah,
right.
Exactly. I mean, the Strat has that I guess that level of sophistication attached to it, or whatever. And maybe it has some the tones of the guitar, or
they absolutely are. They're dirtier on a Telecaster. It's got a little bit more.
Sometimes you want that though, man. You need that. Yeah. You need that dirt. You need to, and that's what really sells what he's singing about as well. Is the having the grit. The grit and the grime and that's, and I guess, and again, that's what I think appealed to people in 1975 as well. Because like I said, Eagles were established. They were perfect sounding, vocals, harmonies.
And it was like the ideal California dream type thing. And here's this guy singing about a car and a guy that's a mechanic or working a job, working down at the boatyard or whatever. Like they were much more. You were able to connect with it much more. It was more kind of this is like he's like me. He's kind of like me. I'm a working man, and he's thinking about being a working man.
I mean, it's not that I don't think that he was an influencer in any way, or maybe he was. I don't know. But when you think of like grunge in the 90s and with the way that the approach to that kind of music and where they were coming from, they wanted to sing about where they were and where, and Bruce is definitely one of the godfathers of that. I mean, like I said, like a lot of these artists were already stars. They were already rising. Fleetwood Mac had been around for years by now, but now they were pop, superstars at this point. Even that first album spawned, like several hits, and it was just a great album from the get go, and just a great sounding record, and it had that appeal, that warmness to it, that, but yeah, something like, so there's no, I'm not surprised that it's number 2. Yeah. I'm glad. I'm glad that it touched people on that level. Of course, I wish I could have appreciated back in the day. I think we were probably a little too young to really,
I think so.
To really get it and understand it. But yeah, but
75, I was still in my pop music, music thing. AM radio was still the thing.
AM radio,
maybe just starting to dip my toe into FM, right?
Yeah.
Just starting to kind of listen to what was, because some of that stuff you would hear on AM radio, like you'd hear a popular Stones song or a popular Elton John song. And then if you went to FM radio, you would kind of hear some of that again, but then you'd hear all this other stuff like Zeppelin that didn't get played on the radio, and Bruce Springsteen and all these other artists that were kind of creating great music, but not necessarily hit music. And they're, one doesn't,
well, it makes the case. It definitely makes the case for albums versus singles. Like, it's a great album. It's very much an album in the sense where it doesn't have a lot of hits, and that, that when it's requiring you to listen to the entire album as opposed to just one song and then putting the album away, which, and nowadays it's like, that's pretty much the norm. It's like streaming, you're cherry picking.
Yeah.
But it's one of those great records where you actually had to sit down and experience the, and of course you mentioned, your sister. So it was nice to have an older sibling who might've been into this stuff, to kind of, guide you in that way, or somebody, could have inspired you to listen to this down the road, or, there's always somebody who's a little bit older and somebody who could get you into this stuff, who had that massive vinyl collection. Like, check these guys out. Like it was, so it's nice to.
Well, it's just nice like she was just kind of listening to it and just kind of fangirling about it. Also, like, oh, Bruce, and So for me, I was like, okay, she's like, it was kind of like when she was into Elvis. It was like, oh, Elvis, and there's probably the physical appearance aesthetic as well for her, like, oh my God, Elvis is, handsome and Bruce and everything. So there was that aspect of, okay, well, I'm not, into that, meaning I'm not going to just listen to somebody because they look good or cute, but she was always playing the music. So it was kind of like I was hearing the music without getting any of the visual or any of that. And so it's just kind of permeating, in the upper floor of our apartment on Main Street, where all the kids' rooms were and the parents were downstairs. So everything, all the music was kind of circulating upstairs. So we've got an interesting connection, and it's been a while since we've talked about Jeff Lynne. So we've got a connection. We've got a connection coming up. And you probably know, you're obviously aware of the Traveling Wilburys. And on their first album is a song called Tweeter and the Monkey Man, which is an homage from Bob Dylan to the style of songwriting that Bruce Springsteen would do. Basically, this song takes place in Jersey. It's got all the trappings of a Bruce Springsteen style song.
Yeah.
But done by Bob Dylan, which I thought was kind of a nice, kind of return the favor type thing. And again, we've talked about Dylan, how he doesn't take himself too seriously. He seems like he's very dour and very, but he seems like he's also kind of, tongue firmly planted in cheek. And Tweeter and the Monkey Man is just that. So if you want like a little adjunct song to listen to, go check out the Traveling Wilburys, and you'll get Bob Dylan's take on Bruce Springsteen, who was then in turn influenced by Bob Dylan.
Yeah.
So we've come full circle with
that's cool, because there's also an album song on I'm punching it up here. I'm sorry. 16-minute song off of Time Out of Mind called Highlands, which is the
Dylan album, right?
Which is it's Bob Dylan. It's 97, and that is kind of like Jungle Land. It's like this real epic sort of like long-winded. I mean, and it really builds to this, So it has that cinematic epic quality to it that I think, even he was even being inspired by Bruce. So yeah, to see one artist influence another, I think it's always a great thing. It's it's like who's better or whatever. Sometimes it doesn't matter anymore. It's just like I like that. Especially getting older, you would start to appreciate how these people could really bounce ideas off each other, and they don't even have to know each other to do it. But to hear somebody mention like Bruce Springsteen mentioning Bob Dylan and appreciating, and then Bob Dylan coming around full circle and, like you mentioned, doing the song like that in the structure.
Yeah. And then Springsteen was featured in before Roy Orbison found his second wind and footing with the Traveling Wilburys. He put out a concert. I think it was on Showtime or whatever, called the Black and White Night.
Black and White, yes.
And Springsteen was right there, front and center.
Front and center. Yep.
You know, so again, you talk about people, you know, meeting their heroes and a lot of similar influences. These artists from the 70s grew up listening to the rock and roll of the 50s and the early 60s. So what, you know, that's again what they're taking it, ingesting it, and then adding what they're bringing to it, and you're getting something totally different from it. But the echoes are there, like we said on other shows. You know, if you know what, once you know what to listen for, you can you can pick it out, and then it makes it even more special, because it's obviously not, he's not ripping off Roy Orbison. It certainly doesn't sound like him, but the influence is there. The Spectre influence is there of once you know what the wall of sound is, and you know, there's, you know, and Brian Wilson took it with Pet Sounds in a different direction, right? He was influenced by the same guy, but these albums sound nothing alike. They're not even closely related, but the influence, when it filters through somebody, comes out differently for each person. Yeah, because they're getting something different from it, and a different perspective, and then putting their mark on it, and then you get Bruce Springsteen. Yeah. You know, which is pretty neat, which is what I love about music. Yeah, it's that building of something, you know, creating something, and sometimes it takes hours upon hours, and I could just imagine what these guys were going through when it took 6 months just to record Born to Run. You know, which, God, I having that kind of patience, I don't know, it just, you know, day after day listening to the same thing, I don't know how they do it. And especially since the other two albums were really made on the cheap. I mean, they were made so cheaply that they were made in upstate New York. They weren't even made in like New York City. Like they used like El Cheapo studio in Blauvelt, New York, which is, if you've never heard of it, well, justifiably so. I don't even think the studio is there anymore, but like they really went, basic budget. So on Born to Run, we're going to give you the money. You got to come up with something. And that's why you get 6 months to labor over something. And then when they kind of pre-released it, the radio stations were getting excited about it. Like, oh, wow. Okay. There's something here. So then that kind of juiced them up a little bit to kind of push through, you know, and get the project done. And I think initially they first started out in a cheaper studio, and then they brought in John Landau to take over on the production. And the first thing he did was move them to the record plant in New York City and said, we need to record in a better studio, first of all. And, you know, that didn't exactly change things overnight. You know, it still took a while to get things sort of moving and for them to kind of come into their own with it. But it's well worth it. I mean, it was just the product, and the finished product is just, it's a masterpiece. The album speaks for itself. Yeah, absolutely. And I love when, you know, like when they re-release this stuff later, I always talk about like, you know, how, you know, having the advantage of having to hear some of the stuff and how they were doing it at the time, and the building of the songs, and they, you know, like the Pet Sounds box set, and you get to hear all the different, like just the musical portion of it, or even when on these documentaries, when they break it down in the studio, and you could hear all these little, I'm like, oh God, I wish I could be, they give you that kind of fly on the wall aspect of being there while it was being made. And I just love that kind of stuff. And I just wish, you know, to be sitting in a studio and watching something special happen and hearing something special happen, I think would have been enough for me. Sometimes you don't realize until after. Sometimes it's work, it's drudgery. You're trying to get through it. And then afterwards you can kind of look back and say, wow, that was a magical time. And I love those documentaries when they're like sitting at the mixing console and they're pulling stuff up and down, and like classic albums. Yeah. Like they did it with like Steely Dan, like they're sitting there like fading stuff in and out, like pulling stuff down. And you get to kind of hear even stuff that you don't necessarily hear, but they leave it in the mix because for them it's layering and it's building, and you may not overtly hear it, but it's there underneath supporting maybe some other instruments that kind of give it that little extra something that they were looking for, that the artist kind of strives for and hears in their head, but can't necessarily. And that's the thing, is a lot of artists hear things in their head, but they're not able to transplant them or transpose them onto record.
Right.
And that's when you get that laboring over things of it's not sounding right. Well, what is it? Well, I'm not sure, but we got to, like,
yeah.
And you keep going until you get it.
Exactly. In this particular doc about Born to Run, it was very much like that. Bruce was just exhausted. He was either, I don't know if he was high off his ass or he was completely wasted or whatever, but he was just out of it. Like sitting on the couch. He's like, don't sound good. I don't like it. It's like, all right, let's try it again. Like, whatever. And then there's so many takes, and then there's so much stuff that he did do, but didn't use too.
Yeah.
There was a lot of that going on, like strings and, oh man, I wish I could have kept that. And, because this is obviously he's listening back to this years later. And he's like, oh, how did we not use that?
Yeah.
And, so that's cool too. It's like
you don't know what you don't know at the time, right? So
exactly.
It's like, and your influences have changed. Maybe, as an older Springsteen, things that he was not aware of then, he's aware of now and would have liked to put it in. So like we said, the music speaks for itself. So I think that's a good place for us to leave it then, is let the music speak.
Sure.
Go check out this album. Absolutely listen to it. It is a treasure. It's easy to dismiss Bruce Springsteen as the fist pumping born in the USA guy, but this was a time before that when he really was hungry and really this was his last ditch effort to really put something out there to keep his career going.
Yeah.
And he scored. And as you heard, he was punching above his weight, literally with 1975 with the albums that were out. He scored big time. So, that's going to do it for this episode of the 3324 podcast. Thank you again for joining us. We appreciate it. You made it to the end. You're with us. You made it. So now go get yourself a nice refreshment. If you haven't had one yet, get a cookie because you deserve it. We certainly deserve one as well. Again, one more time, find us on 3324 podcast on Instagram and Facebook. A lot of great stuff going on there. And for Eric, this has been Dean. We will catch you on the flip side.